Hi, my name is Anna, and I come from a family of aristocrats. I used to live in England and go to a boarding school for girls, but some time ago, my family moved to America. My life had always followed a strict schedule. I had always wanted more freedom, so I was very happy when I was transferred to a regular public school. On the first day of classes, my parents reminded me to mind my manners and behave. I acted like a real lady, but for some reason my classmates looked at me weird. I noticed that they were acting quite differently. They were free and liberated. It was so unusual. But the teachers praised me and immediately began to set me as an example. I was good at drawing. When the history teacher found out about it, he asked me to make a painting for the school's historical exhibition. During a break, one of my classmates called Blake suddenly approached me. He had a lot of tattoos and an unusual haircut and wore provocative clothes. I'd never talked to anyone like him, so all I could do was stare. I even forgot to mind my manners. Look at this lady. Seems like I've met an angel. His friends came up to us, laughing loudly. Talking to them was so interesting that I didn't even mind being ridiculed. I wanted to know all about their lives. It turned out that Blake and his friends called themselves a gang. They loved extreme sports, listened to heavy rock, and even drove a convertible. Blake's father was a master of sports and rally, and let him drive his car. I was delighted with my acquaintances. I wanted to be like them. When I mentioned it, Blake laughed. "You should stay in your fairy tale world. It fits you perfectly." Soon I heard my classmates discuss a party Blake's gang was throwing it the next day at a secret location. I really wanted to go there. Of course, no one invited me, but I persisted. After classes, I went to the schoolyard. Blake was already getting into his convertible. I plucked up the courage and asked him if I could come to the party. Blake's friends burst out laughing. He grinned as well, but to my surprise, he allowed it. "Come if you want, just don't faint when you do." The next second, his car took off. I really liked Blake and I wanted to impress him. I decided to change and went shopping. I had my own credit card that I almost never used. I'd saved up a lot of money and wanted to buy new clothes and completely change my style. I chose short skirts, leather tops, and ripped jeans. I'd never worn anything like it, but I wanted to try. When I came out of the fitting room and looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize myself at all. A completely different person was looking at me. I suddenly noticed my parents in the reflection. Just imagine, they were also walking around the mall. I quickly ran back to the fitting room. Heck! It seemed Mom had noticed me. I prayed for them to leave. When they did, I paid for the clothes and got some temporary tattoos. I never would have dared to get real ones, but those? Why not? At home, my mom told me she had seen a girl in the mall that looked a lot like me, except she was dressed terribly. The young people here are too wild. That was close. I quickly went to my room and looked around it. I noticed how boring it was. I was especially annoyed by the pink color surrounding me. Blake was wrong about one thing. Fairy tale world did not suit me at all. I didn't want to live in it anymore. I was about to go to bed when I remembered my teacher's request, so I had to choose what to draw and then work on the painting late at night. In the morning, I went down to the living room in my usual clothes and had breakfast with my parents. Dad offered me a ride to school. I lied and said that I wanted to walk there. I waited until my parents had left and changed into my new clothes. I applied the temporary tattoos and didn't recognize my reflection once again. I couldn't believe I was going to school looking like that. And you know what? I really went for it. My classmates looked at me in surprise again. Most importantly, Blake noticed my new look. By the way, the teachers did as well. However, my look was the only thing that changed. I still laid out my textbooks carefully and was very polite to everyone, so none of the teachers scolded me. In history class, I showed my painting to the teacher. He was very pleased. He pointed out the things I could improve. You will also be telling the visitors about this historical event. A museum director, Mr. Collins, is coming to our school. We need to impress him. I promised not to let him down. I was supposed to go to a French course in the evening. I called the teacher and said I wasn't feeling well. I had better plans. After all, Blake had invited me to his party. The gang's secret place turned out to be the roof of an abandoned building. You can't imagine how cool it was. They had put pillows everywhere, a bar out of planks, and a small fire in the center. Blake turned on rock music. Everyone was having fun, frying sausages and eating fast food. I'd never tasted anything like it, but I liked it. Everything was new and unfamiliar to me. I realized I didn't want to stop at changing my clothes. I wanted to go further. I started dancing and gradually relaxed. Then I sat down next to Blake and we got to talking. He told me I should do something rebellious. "Why don't you burn the painting you made for tomorrow's exhibition?" What? Doing something like that never even occurred to me. That seems like going too far. Some rules shouldn't be broken. Blake chuckled and objected. My gang only has one rule. There are no rules. I wanted to impress him, and I was also really tired of all the stupid rules. I decided to do it. It might be hard to believe, but I burned my painting. Everyone immediately began to whistle and applaud. I got home late, I changed my clothes in the yard, and headed in. Mom immediately pounced on me and asked where I had been. I had to lie and said the first thing that came to my mind, that I had gone to the theater with a new friend of mine. Mom was surprised. To the theater? Wow, your dad and I went there too. Did you like the performance? I managed to get away with the lie, but only just. Then Mom suddenly sniffed and said I smelled like smoke. It's probably the smell from the street. The neighbors are barbecuing. I was full of adrenaline. I'd never lied to my parents so blatantly before. The next day, the history teacher asked me to see the finished painting. It felt a bit awkward. I lied and said I had ruined it by accident. The teacher demanded I speak at the exhibition anyway, and at least tell the visitors about the scene I had been drawing. During the break, I went to the dining room. I got a coffee and wandered down the hallway. Lost in thought, I was practicing my speech in my head when I suddenly ran into a stranger. I spilled coffee all over him. The man immediately shouted and went to the bathroom to wash out the stains. When I came to the exhibition, I wasn't feeling confident at all. How was I supposed to talk about a painting that didn't exist? But that wasn't the worst part. I was in for an unpleasant surprise. The guy I had spilled coffee on turned out to be Mr. Collins. I was taken aback and forgot my entire speech. As a result, I did poorly. I constantly got confused and distracted. Mr. Collins looked at me skeptically and then whispered to the history teacher, "Is this the talented student you told me about?" On the one hand, I was upset that everything had turned out that way, but on the other hand, I was glad for once I wasn't perfect. The French course began right after classes. I was about to go, but got held up at school and was running late. As I was walking down the street, a convertible pulled up next to me. Blake offered me a ride. I agreed, and it was amazing. Blake drove the car the same way he lived. He ignored all the rules. He cut off other cars and drove around the city at a crazy speed. At some point, there was a red traffic light ahead of us. Blake slammed on the brakes, but we didn't manage to stop in time. The convertible crashed into the car in front of us. The impact wasn't very strong, but we did leave some dents. I must have had some sort of bad luck streak because the driver of the car turned out to be Mr. Collins. He saw me, turned red with anger, and said through gritted teeth, "It's you again?" He started arguing with Blake. At first I stayed silent, but then I stood up for Blake. Mr. Collins started yelling and sputtering. He almost called the police, but Blake eventually gave him money and we left. By the way, why were you in such a hurry? When I told him about the French course, Blake suggested I skip it and have fun. How could I miss such an opportunity? I called the teacher and lied about being sick again. Blake left the car in the parking lot, and we drove to a gaming club. I was surprised that Blake wasn't worried about the dent on the convertible. When I asked him about it, he just shrugged and said that he never worried about anything at all. We had a great time at the club. Then we went for a walk, and Blake showed me some cool places, abandoned buildings and beautiful streets. We lived in different worlds, but it felt like I'd known him my whole life. I came home late again. I wanted to change in the yard like last time, but Dad was standing there. So I decided to sneak into my room. As soon as I got in, there was footsteps outside the door and my mom barged in. I barely had time to throw on a long bathrobe. "Where have you been? Your French teacher called asking about your health. Anna, have you been skipping classes?" It seemed pointless to deny it, but I came up with a new lie. I said that my friend needed help, so I had gone to her place. Mom pursed her lips. "This better be the last time you're pulling something like this. You must stick to your schedule and not get distracted. What friend were you helping anyway? Do I know her?" I mumbled something unintelligible and pretended to be tired. After Mom left, I breathed a sigh of relief, changed into pajamas, and went to bed. I had almost fallen asleep when I heard someone knock on my window. My room was on the second floor. Can you imagine how scared I was? I carefully pulled back the curtain and could not believe my eyes. Blake had climbed up the drain pipe to see me. It was crazy. What if my parents saw him? Blake told me to relax and not to worry. We spent most of the night chatting. My first impression of him had been wrong. We found a lot of things to talk about. I realized I was head over heels in love, and then something else happened. Blake kissed me before he left. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. Mom wanted me to do a million things over the weekend, but Blake suggested we spend time together instead. You've probably guessed what I did already, right? I pretended to be sick so that my mom would leave me alone. I tried to act convincingly, but she still squinted suspiciously at me. In the end, she believed me, and my parents left. I immediately got out of bed, quickly packed up, and hurried to Blake. After all, we're going on a real date. Here's a little spoiler. It was a very unusual date. I'm gonna tell you about it. At first, everything was going great. We skateboarded and then went on some extreme rides at an amusement park. The last one turned out to be the scariest of them all. We got into the booth right before it started moving. Blake admitted that he had run out of money, so we went without tickets. That was when it got truly extreme. No sooner had we gone down that the cashier ran up to us. A couple of cops were hovering behind him. Blake grabbed my arm and we started running away. The cop rushed after us. It was insane. At one point we were running past a museum. Someone was coming down the stairs and I accidentally bumped into them. The man lost his balance and fell. I turned around and, damn it was Mr. Collins. He choked with indignation. There was no time to apologize. We ran on and soon broke away from the cops. We stopped to catch our breath and burst out laughing. Our emotions were off the charts. Blake suddenly complimented me. He admired how quickly I was cutting loose and changing. We kissed again, but at the worst possible moment, I got a call from my mom. She asked me about my well-being and told me that they would be home soon. I had to head back at once. I managed to arrive just a couple minutes before them and jumped under the blanket without even taking my clothes off. My parents walked into my room. Mom suggested calling a doctor. I assured her I was feeling much better. Well, that's great. An important guest is coming over for dinner tomorrow. We need to make a good impression on him. It's important for my work. What terrible news. I was sick of such pompous dinners. The next day, I went to school and told Blake about the dinner. Surprising even myself, I asked him to come. It won't be so boring with you there. I don't care if you don't know etiquette. Unfortunately, Blake said that a cool concert was taking place that evening. His whole gang had dreamed of going there. Blake even managed to get me a ticket. It sounded so cool, but I really couldn't go. I didn't want to get Dad in trouble. Naturally, I was in a terrible mood in the evening. I put on the dress my mom had chosen. My parents reminded me to act like a perfect lady. An architectural monument in the city was soon going to be restored. Dad hoped his company would be the one to do it. We were sitting at a set table when the doorbell rang. My parents went to open the door and stayed in the living room. When they returned with the guest, I gaped in surprise. The guest turned out to be Mr. Collins. I looked completely different, so he didn't recognize me at first. However, after sitting down at the table, he even cried out in surprise. "It's you again?" My parents were confused and asked what was going on. I was hoping for a miracle, but no such luck. Mr. Collins told them about everything. My failed presentation, the wrecked car, even the cops. But worst of all, he told them about Blake. I grabbed my head. Now I was definitely finished. "You should focus on your daughter's upbringing before taking on any serious projects." He got angry and stormed out. My parents ran after him, and then I heard a commotion by the door. I decided to take a look at what was going on and froze. Blake was standing in the doorway. I barely recognized him in a suit. He had missed the concert for me. Mr. Collins was boiling with anger. He said that Dad wouldn't get the project and left. My parents guessed that Blake was the guy Mr. Collins had been talking about. "So, this is your friend." Mom realized it had been me she'd seen at the mall. I had never seen her look so furious. She told Blake to get out and leave me alone at once, but he surprised me. He politely calmed my parents down, made conversation, and acted like a real gentleman. I couldn't believe my ears. I couldn't help but tell that cool guy what I thought of him. You can't pretend to be a rebel and then make small talk with my parents. Blake remained unperturbed. He said that he acted depending on the situation and that hiding your rebellious spirit was sometimes okay. That was when I found out something interesting. I know it's hard to believe, but it turned out that Blake had studied at a boarding school for boys. He had transferred to our school a few years ago. I thought about his words. It seemed like I had gone a bit too far. What I had been doing didn't really feel right. Blake managed to find a common language with my parents. We convinced them that it was okay to relax sometimes. Since then, I had been in charge of my own fate and finally had time for my hobbies. By the way, I made a new painting and gave it to my history teacher as a gift. Then, Blake and I went to the museum and talked to Mr. Collins. He apologized and I asked him to give my dad another chance. It went well. Now Dad's company is restoring the architectural monument. I eventually found myself and don't go to such extremes anymore. Have you ever rebelled? Tell us in the comments down below about the craziest thing you've done.